show you the auditorium. I don't know if you can see. There's the people.
Hey everyone, how are you guys doing?
Okay, I think we have around 200 people here. So everybody is coming here to listen to you. And are you excited?
Yeah, I'm very excited. Hopefully hopefully I have something that'll help you guys out, and hopefully you guys are having a good time.
For sure. So, are you nervous?
I am a little nervous, I'll admit.
Okay, so the auditorium is all yours.
All right. All right, sorry about this. All right. So, as I said before, I'm excited to be here. Hopefully I can do something today, present something today that will help some of you guys in your applications and in your development process. So today I'm going to speak just a little bit on content projection. But maybe before I get started, hey Carlos, can you just mute your side of the mic for a minute? I just keep hearing echoes.
Yeah, for sure. 1 second, please.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about content projection and ngTemplate today. But before I get started, I just want to introduce myself a little bit. My name is Preston Lamb. I'm from Roy, Utah. It's about a half hour north of Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm married and have 3 kids, and love spending time with my family. And then you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at plambweb, and on GitHub at pjlem12. So I'd love to hear from you guys after today. Also, you'll see this link at the top of the screen. It says ask a question. If you guys submit questions, then I can see them on my screen, and then I'll answer a couple questions at the end. And then if you put your Twitter handle or email address or something, I can reach out after as well and try to answer any questions that you have as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first part that I want to talk about is what is ngTemplate, the ngTemplate tag. So the first thing that I learned about this when I started looking into what ngTemplate was is I realized that we're already using them all the time in Angular. We just don't know that we are. You'll see an example here on the left image. It has a div with the ngIf directive on it. And under the covers, Angular is using an ngTemplate tag to accomplish the ngIf. And so we use that all the time. So we use the ngTemplate there. And then in addition, we use it on an ngFor loop. The bottom example is what ngFor actually looks like when you use it in your application. So we use them under the scenes on accident all the time. But so I think it's good to know that that's how ngIf and ngFor work, so that you can write them if you need to. One of the benefits of using ngTemplate directly is that it doesn't add extra markup to your page. Where if you put the ngIf on a div, then that div shows up in the HTML of the page. But if you put it on ngTemplate, then ngTemplate is not added to the markup. So in some cases you might not want that extra div on your page, and so you can add it directly to ngTemplate. If you don't care if that extra div is there, then you can go ahead and still use ngIf, the ngIf directive like normal. But this is another option. The next thing I learned was from the Angular docs, and it says that the ngTemplate core directive represents part of a template that will be combined with other parts to make up a whole template for a component. And so basically here I have a little, little diagram of what happens on an ngFor loop. And so the ngFor in this case may be part of the whole template and outputs each one of those red boxes. But the entire template of the page probably also contains a navigation header, maybe some other information on the page, an explanation of what the list is, some filtering options, all that stuff. And so the ng template under the hood that we looked at in the last slide for the ngFor just represents part of the template of this page. And so that was good for me to know that that it just represents part of the page, and again, to understand this a little bit better. So let's go on to talk a little bit more about what content projection looks like. And content projection, it really is kind of like projecting an image from your computer using a projector onto a screen. And so that's kind of what I think of it as. Here, you'll see an example on the top image of a component that you may have made, and I'm just calling it parent component. To use content projection, you'll have your parent component like this on your page, and then you'll put your child component inside the tags of the parent component. And then in that parent component here on the bottom image, to output that content, you'll have parts of your template, whatever it may be, and then you'll have an ngContent tag somewhere in the HTML, and that will output the child component markup that you have defined. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, and we'll look at a couple examples. I read, as I was preparing for this and learning more about this, I read a blog post from Asim Hussein, and he put it very well, I think. He said that a component can use the ngContent tag to define where the inner content of the tags of our Angular component are output. And so this ngContent tag is vital when you're using content projection, but it's very simple as far as that goes, that wherever you put the ngContent tag, then this inner tag, child component, will be output right there. And we'll look at why I think content projection is so great. But essentially, if we use content projection in our components as we develop them, if we publish those on NPM, then other people can use our components, but they can define how the component looks, and we can define how it acts. So let's take look at a couple examples here. The first is a use case for using ngTemplate. And so right here, we have an example that I've run into several times where I have a list of items and I want to output them, but sometimes I don't want to output one of the items based on some attribute of that item. And so I don't know how many of you have tried this, but it doesn't work. You can't put two structural directives like this on the same element. So you can't use ngFor and ngIf on the same item. So one way to get around that is to use ngTemplate directly and loop over your items with ngFor on that ngTemplate, and then use the ngIf on the li. And again, like I mentioned before, this is really helpful and really great because the ngTemplate doesn't add extra markup to the page. So you won't have any issues with your ul and li items here and it not displaying correctly because ngTemplate doesn't add any extra markup on the page. Let's go to another option. I took this from Bootstrap dropdown, but I've used dropdowns before in the past, like to filter lists or whatever, and I didn't want to show whatever the selected option was in the dropdown. I just wanted that to show up at the top if they had selected it. And so again, I couldn't use ngFor and ngIf on this li down here, and so I just wrapped the ngTemplate around the li and use the ngFor, and then you can loop over those. So let's go ahead and look at a couple examples of doing this. Hopefully you can see. Let me zoom in a little bit here. All right, so over here in this app component, I've defined a few different items here, and two of them have a link and one of them doesn't. And so the example here is that you want to loop over over these cards and you want to link to them if they have a link, but you don't want to link to them, obviously, if they don't. You don't want to have a broken link on your page. And so here on line 4, I use the ng template and the ngFor directive, and then I can loop over those. And then inside of it, I have 2 divs, both of them. Well, I have 1 div and an anchor tag. The div has the ngIf not item.link, and then it outputs the card information. And then the second one has, or the anchor tag has the ngIf for if the link is present. And then I used href here just, obviously, if this was a full application, it would be router link, but then you can link to the item here and output it. So this one doesn't go anywhere. This one you can see has the blue underlines and the cursor to show that it links. So that's one example of how you can use ng template in your application. The other option, or the other example I have here, is an example of this slide where it has the drop down. So look at that real quick. Again, I just have a list of options here, option 1, 2, and 3, that are going to show up in the drop down. And then in my component, or in the HTML for the component, I have 2 drop downs, and they're both going to change when we select one. But the first one, I just loop through all the menu items and output all of them every time. And the second one, the bottom one, it'll hide the one that's currently selected. So you'll see here, when I open this top one, option 1 is selected and it still shows in the list. And then if I select option 2, then we change. But in this bottom one, I hide the currently selected item when it's selected. And so then only the ones that they can choose that are different show up. So that's one example of, or 2 examples, I guess, of where I have used ng template before. All right, so this just goes over a little bit more what you can, or how you can accomplish that on the ng template. Put the ngFor and ngFor of attributes or directives here. And then the let option right here, that's like in your ngFor. Let me go back to Stack Blitz. That's just like here in the ngFor, we say let option of list options and create that local variable. That's what this let dash option here is doing. It's the same thing. So don't forget that. And then you can do the check for if option is not the selected option, then go ahead and output that. Okay, so we talked a little bit about content projection before, and I like to compare it to having a block of clay and turning it into a pot, as you can see here. I've used several component libraries before, and they're all really, really good. The only downside to them is that you're locked into exactly what they decided the UI of those components should be. And so if that doesn't match your design, you either have to change your design to fit that, or you have to try and find another one. But if we use content projection in our component libraries, then we can provide the block of clay essentially to other developers, and then they can decide how it's going to look. So the problems, if you don't use content projection and you still want people to be able to determine how the component looks and feels, is the first thing is that you would have to provide a whole big list of inputs. That input list might include an icon that they want to use for it, colors of text, color of border, background, images, all this stuff. And you could make one input and have it be a big configuration object, but it's the same thing. So there's too many inputs to handle. Too many outputs is the other thing. You might have a whole bunch of different actions or events that need to happen when they click or interact with the component. And now you have a big list of outputs that they have to subscribe to. And the third is integration with other third-party components or directives that you use, it can be difficult to then implement that inside your application. And so those are some of the issues if you don't use content projection and implementing component libraries into your application. So the solution is to plan for this during the development and implementation of your application. So if you are developing a component library, plan on using content projection, and you can maybe provide a default look and feel for the component, but plan on letting people use their own components to display the UI, and then you can just provide the function of that component. Oh, sorry, I have an example right here. So this is a component library that it's a small one that I developed a little while ago, and it provides a way for you to select tags from a list and apply them to something in your application. So sorry, I thought I'd preloaded all my examples, but I didn't. So we have here a list of possible tags that they can select. And in this, I'm going to hide the editor here. So this bottom one here is the default component where I added a list up here of selected tags to output, and then the available tags, a little filter that you can do, and then an icon where you can select them and it shows, and then you can remove them. And so it works, really well. It'll select the items for them and everything, but they are locked into this design, how I designed it. And so that's what I used at first. But then I realized that content projection would be a lot better. And so I provided that as an option in the component library, and then people, maybe they want it to look a little bit different, and they can make all these buttons, and the buttons can change a different color when they select one, and they can remove them this way. And so you can see in the HTML here, the bottom one, they just use the default component ATS tag select, and they pass in a few inputs and some icon classes and all that stuff. And you can see there's quite a few inputs here. And then in the other one where they get to use template refs or content projection, that's what the TR stands for, is template refs. They can provide inside this ngTemplate tag, they can provide their own components that they have developed for what the selected tags should look like and what the possible tag list should look like. And there's still a little bit of setup that I can go over with people. If you have questions, let me know and I can reach out to you. There's still a little bit of setup that they have to do here, but they're able to define exactly how it looks, and so they can change that. And if after a while they get tired of the buttons, they can move to something else. But they have complete control over how it looks. But the component itself is still handling how it functions and how those are selected. All right. So last thing that I have today is how you can use ngTemplate again with content projection to inside your app to output, like, for example, items in lists, and you can write the component once that outputs the components, but you can pass in different components to output them in different manners. So in this case, maybe sometimes you want a full contact card, and then other times you just want their avatar and their name. And so this last example shows how to do that. And so I have a list of contacts here, and then we're going to output them in these two different manners here. So in the HTML, I have the contact list component, which I have defined over here. And then I have the ngTemplate right here that I use, and that makes it so that this app contact card is output inside the contact list. And then I just provide that app contact card, and then it will output this card. And then down here, it's basically the same thing, but I have the app contact preview, and it just puts this preview of the contact. And if we go to the contact list real quick, we'll see that I have a little bit of markup, and then right here I have this ng template, and then I have the ngFor, and this is a little different. It's not using the ng content tag, but it's doing the same thing where I have the ngFor template, and I tell it's the contact template, and so use that to output it. And then over here in the contact list .ts file, then I tell it here that I'm going to pass in a contact template to output that, and that's where this comes into play, the ng template and the component that I pass in. So in this case, you know, this is a pretty small example, but maybe in your app you have places where you don't want to rewrite the logic of looping over something, for example, in multiple different components. And so you write that once, and then you can use the contact card or the contact preview and output those. So those are just some examples. But I think that's it for today. My time's just about up. So here's my contact information. Reach out to me if you have any questions. This first link is for a blog post that I wrote on this, and the second link is for the slides. So please reach out if you have any questions. And thank you very much for letting me come and present. I have one question that was submitted. I'll show that real quick. What's the best advantage of using ng content? In my opinion, I kind of mentioned it a few times in here, but being able to have to be able to provide a content library where you as the developer can, whether it's internal or on npm, it doesn't matter, but where you can define how a component works, but then somebody else can define how it looks and how users interact with it exactly. I think that's one of the best advantages. You can reuse those components across multiple applications and multiple designs much easier than being locked into a specific design that you either are using on a different project or that somebody else decided for you. So I think that's the best option. But thanks again. Hopefully you guys have learned something, and I'm excited to look, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you guys and answering any questions that you may have.
All right, Preston, thank you so much. ¿Cómo estuvo la charla? Démosle un aplauso a Preston, por favor. All right, Preston, thank you so much. People are so thankful for your talk and for explaining this amazing functionality feature of Angular. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time, and see you soon. So I have a question.